You know, I think of all the fictional characters of the last few weeks, I think my favorite are the peaceful protesters. Because while Batman might be a cooler figure, the peaceful protesters are just so much more fantastical. They've made a new appearance. This in the BBC, an actual BBC headline. George Floyd, London anti-racism protests leave 27 officers hurt. Okay, that's sort of a more believable title. Here's how they tweeted out the headline. 27 police officers injured during largely peaceful anti-racism protests in London. That is not possible. That tweet is a nonsense because 27 cops can't be injured in largely peaceful protests. You can't have those things at the same time. From the article, protests on Saturday sparked by the death of George Floyd. Is that true? We'll get to that in a second. Were largely peaceful, but were marred later by disturbances outside of Downing Street. You know, they were largely peaceful, the protests themselves, but they were marred. That's unfortunate because they were so peaceful, but they were marred later by disturbances. Not violence, not the people committing the violence. One demonstrator, who was not at Downing Street, saw officers acting very aggressively elsewhere. It was the officers acting aggressively, you see. And they shouldn't do that. That's not what officers are for. They're not there to use force. They're there to enforce the law. Wait a second. Force and force. Let's ignore that the entire purpose of the police is to use force for just 1 second. The majority of Saturday's protests were peaceful, but in the evening there were disturbances outside Downing Street. BBC Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simmons said the protests were largely over when missiles and fireworks were thrown at a police line. They were thrown, not by the protesters, they just were thrown. 2 officers were seriously injured, including a mounted branch officer who was knocked from her horse when it hit a set of traffic lights while appearing to bolt. She suffered a broken collarbone, a broken rib, a punctured lung, according to the Metropolitan Police Federation. That's not nothing, okay? Those are real injuries. Those are serious injuries. Those were caused by the allegedly nonviolent protests. Now, you can actually see there are a number of videos that came out. The protests got so violent that the police eventually ran away from the so-called peaceful protesters. You can see there's some sort of chaos there. People are throwing things at the cops. Cops in America not quite as well armed or cops in Britain rather, not quite as well armed as those in America. Eventually, the police are running away as these goons, these thugs, these criminals are throwing objects at them. A lot of problems with policing in the UK. Obviously, they are not armed to do the job that they're supposed to do. But the question here is, why are there protests going on in the United Kingdom over the death of George Floyd? Is it because people in the UK, Brits, just really have a connection to this man in Minneapolis and half a world away in the United States? I don't think so. I think there's a deeper ideological, political rebellion going on here.